Hi everyone, it's Datrina from the Alluring Bead Boutique, and as promised in my last video, I'm going to teach you guys today and do a little tutorial for how to make this gorgeous little brick stitched leaf. I also mentioned that I'm going to change up and not use this huge 8-0 in the center, so what I'll be doing is using just 2 colors of 11-0s instead. And if you're interested in the color codes, for my green, I'm using transparent olivine. These are Toho size 11. And for my stem color, I'm going to be using some 11-0 Miyuki rounds, and these are Duracoat galvanized matte champagne, and I'll be using those for the stem. So before we can begin doing brick stitch, we're going to have to create a base using ladder stitch, and I'll be using the method of a 2-bead stack ladder. So to get started, I'm going to pick up 4 of my leaf color. And for my threading today, I'm using some 6-pound black satin Fireline and a size 11 beading needle. I've carried the beads down towards the end of the thread, and I'm just going to leave myself a couple of inches of tail. And what I want to do is I want to pass through the bottom 2 beads one more time. Then I'm going to pull my thread through. And as I pull, you'll see that those 2 sets of beads will sit side by side. And our tail thread is exiting from the beads on the right. So I am going to sew down from top to bottom through the beads on the left. And I'm just going to pull that through. Now, I could stop there, and I'm in perfect position to add my next set of beads, but I like to further secure this first little set together by sewing back up through the first 2 beads on the right, and then back down the 2 beads on the left one more time. And I'm having a little difficulty with my light, so pause just for a moment. I'm going to get my headset. All right, so you can see here that I'm sewing up the 2 beads on the right, and then I'll just get into position again by sewing down through the 2 beads on the left and pulling my thread. So as you can see on my sample leaf, I have created a ladder that is 5 stacks long and 2 beads high. So what I need to do is I've already got my first 2, which are my leaf color. I want the center stack to be the same color as my stem beads. So I'm going to pick up 2 of my stem beads. I'm going to come back through the beads that I'm currently exiting from the other side. So my working thread is exiting the bottom, so I'll take my needle and go from top to bottom through those same 2 beads and pull this into position. And then I just simply need to step up through the 2 beads I'm adding. And that will get those beads situated in place. And then pull my thread all the way through. And then I'm going to repeat that process 2 more times, only I'm going to use my leaf-colored green beads for that. So if you are not familiar with ladder stitch, there are tons of videos here and also on my channel that show you all the different variations of creating a beaded ladder, which is the foundation for several stitches, such as brick stitch, herringbone stitch, and many other projects that you might encounter and want to learn how to do. So I'm coming down and I'm adding my last set of 2. And then I'm going to step up. And one more time on this end, I am going to reinforce that last stitch so things stay nice and neat looking. So I'll just come back down through the 2 beads on the 4th column or the 4th stack, and then back up through the 2 in the 5th one. And that just gives me a little bit more sturdy of a base, just like that. So now we're ready to do our brick stitch. And so for our first row of brick stitch, I want to add 7 beads on top of my ladder base here. I want 3 of my green beads on the left, 1 stem bead in the middle, and 3 green beads on the right. So to do that, we have a limited number of thread bridges here along the top. So what we have are 1, 2, 3, 4 thread bridges across the top with which we're going to work, but we need to add 7 beads that way. So our first stitch, we're going to pick up 2 of our green ones. The first stitch in any brick stitch row has to start with 2 beads, or you'll have exposed thread, and your bead will sit sideways rather than straight up and down. So I'm picking up 2, and I'm coming under the very first thread bridge. I'm going to position those beads like that so that they sit straight up and down on the beadwork. I'm going to come up through the second bead to complete the stitch. I like for my end bead to look nice and neat, so what I do is I come down through the first bead and I square stitch it back to the second bead and just go up through the second bead again, like that. And that helps that bead to sit nice and straight. All right, so I need one more green bead on this side. So I'm going to pick up a green, and I am going to come under my next thread bridge. And I'm going to sew up through that bead. That completes the stitch. So now I'm ready for my stem bead because I have my 3 beads on. And every time I add the stem bead, I am going to add it to the thread bridge. I'm working in this direction. My thread is exiting here. I'm going to cross over that bead to the thread bridge on the other side of the stem bead below, so that when you pull it into position, those beads are going to sit relatively on top of one another. Then I will just sew up through that bead and pull my thread all the way through. I'm having a problem getting that bead. Just one moment. Take your time. Don't get frustrated. So you can take your finger and hold that bead into position like that. It is a little fidgety until you get a few rows added. Then I'm going to tighten that bead down into place using my thumbnail. So now I need to add 3 beads on this side of the beadwork. And what I've done is I've used this thread bridge once. So I'm going to have to use it again. In order to get 3 beads on. You don't want to use a thread bridge more than twice because your beads will just basically, except you could get away with it on the edge, but your beads would just basically be too bunched up if you try to use one more than 2 times with beads this small on the base. So if you had 8 O's on the base, you could actually get away with it. All right, so I'm going to pull kind of snug to get those beads sitting beside each other. And now I've got to add 2 beads to my last thread bridge down here. So pick up 1, come under the last thread bridge. And then I'm going to flip my work around here just to make it easier to sew up through that bead. And then I need to add 1 more to that same thread bridge because I have to have a total of 3. So here I am coming under that same thread bridge. This thread is my working thread exiting the top of the previous added bead. I'm going to drag that down, hold it tight, and sew up. And this is what we have so far. So what we're doing is we are increasing our beadwork as we go along. So on the next row, we are going to increase again. We are going to have 4 green seed beads on each side of the stem bead. The next row will have 5 on each side, and the following row is also going to have 5 on each side. So in order to create this beautiful little stepped look along the edge, I'm going to show you how to go about this. So in order to accomplish our increase, we're going to be reusing some of our thread bridges again. And if you'll notice a recurring theme as to that, we will be having to reuse thread bridges on the right-hand side of the beadwork each time. But you notice that I flip my work each time as well. So I'm going to take my first stitch under the first thread bridge, and of course I'm using the 2 beads. We always have to use 2 to start a row. And then I am going to do the same thing I did on the last row, which is sew up through my second bead, down through my first bead, and back up through my second bead again, just to kind of keep that bead on the end straight. And you can also do the same thing at the end of each row. Square stitch those last 2 beads together rather than just under the thread bridge. So it just makes it look a little bit more uniform and a little more defined. All right, so there's 2 of my beads on. So now I have to go to a single bead at a time. I'm going to come to the next thread bridge with my next bead, because I already have 2 beads in the first thread bridge, and sew back up my single bead, snug it down into position, and I'm going to add my 4th bead now. And as you'll see, I have an extra thread bridge here on this side of the stem bead, so I'm going to go ahead and use it. And I'll sew up through that bead and add my stem bead. And I'm going to sew across the stem bead to the thread bridge on the other side each time. Now I have remaining this thread bridge, because I've only got 1 bead there. I have this thread bridge and this thread bridge. So I know I'm going to probably put 2 on this end. So I need to add 2 more. So I will probably go ahead and reuse the existing thread bridge that I'm working on, which is by the stem, for the first bead, the first green on the right. And for the next stitch, I will go into the other thread bridge, which it kind of gets hidden underneath the bead you just added, but it hasn't been used. So that thread bridge had not been used up until this point, which I did use it now. So all right, I'm going to flip this around just to get a better lighting on sewing up through that bead. And now I'm going to sew 2 beads, 1 at a time, into this last thread bridge on the end. So there's the first. And I also have some very beginner tutorials for brick stitch, doing flat brick stitch like this. And there are plenty on other beaders' channels also. I found when I was first learning that if I couldn't quite understand what was going on one person's video, I might go to a different person teaching it and be able to grasp the concept really easily. So now I need to add my last 4th green bead here on this side. So I'm going to reuse that last thread bridge. And once you get good at brick stitch and you're really comfortable with it, you will be able to feel the needle finding that thread bridge underneath the beads. Nice, and it just, you'll be able to tell. It's just something that happens as you're learning. All right, so now that we're at the end of this row, and on the next row, we want to increase up to 5 beads on each side. As we increase, we're always going to pick up 2 and sew under the very first thread bridge. And that helps us to start the increase right out of the gate. So up through the second bead, and then come down and square stitch that first bead to the second bead. I notice my hands are a little bit more unreliable today. I'm having to take some prednisone. And I had to start with 5 pills today, and it's got me a little on the jittery side. Alright, so now I've got the first 2 on. I'm going to keep working a single bead at a time under the next thread bridge. Because this time I want 5 beads on the left and 5 beads on the right of my stem bead. So I'm up to 3. And if you'll notice, see, I can use 1 thread bridge per single bead on this side of the beadwork, excepting for the very first stitch. And now I'm ready to add my stem bead once I sew up through this last bead. And come across. Alright, so now to add 5 beads over here, you can see that I only have 1, 2, 3, 4 thread bridges. So I can choose where I want to add, my 2 beads per thread bridge. You don't have to do it on the end. You can choose to do it anywhere along the way here. But because you start each row by putting 2 beads under the first thread bridge, by putting 2 beads on the last one, it kind of evens out the way that the rows look on the outer edge. All right. There we go. These olivine beads are a little bit dark, and sometimes it's hard for me to see even with my headset where I'm putting the needle. All right, so I'm going to add a bead to the next thread bridge. And that is my second bead. My third bead is going under the next thread bridge. Plus, if you just do it on your first stitch on the side and the last stitch on the side, it just makes it easier to get into a rhythm. By reusing your stem thread bridge and your end thread bridge. It just helps you to get in a rhythm. Alright, I got 2 more beads to add here, and I'm going to go ahead and come under my last thread bridge with the first one. And use that thread bridge for the last bead also. Now go ahead and flip it before I sew up through my last bead. Stab my finger. And this is what we have so far. Now I am ready to do a repeat of this row here with 5 beads. So I'm going to do another row that has 5 beads on each side. So in order to make everything work out correctly, what we're going to do is we're going to pick up our 2 beads, but instead of sewing under this first thread bridge, I'm going to sew under the second one. And I'm going to position my beads and do all the steps that I previously did by sewing up the bead on the right and then square stitching it to the bead on the left. And then I'm going to go ahead and add one bead to each of the remaining thread bridges on this side, and I will have 5. So there's 3. Four. And the last one goes under the last thread bridge on this side. So now I'm going to add my stem bead, and once we get that bead added, on the opposite side of the stem, we will only need to reuse one of our thread bridges, and so that we have enough thread bridges to add 5 beads. So, let me make sure that I didn't get my thread caught down here on the bottom of my beadwork. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and just simply reuse this one by my stem. And that will keep me in the same routine that I've been in when I was creating the increases. And now you can just add one bead to the remaining 4 thread bridges on this side, and I'll meet you back. So this is what we have so far. And where we are on our leaf construction is we're ready to do a decrease, because now we've done our 2 rows of 5. We want to do 2 rows with 4 beads on each side. And then we're going to decrease to 3, and then we're going to decrease to 2. So let me show you how to do a decrease. So we added the last bead, and I went ahead and stepped up through that bead because that basically completes the stitch. But in order to do a decrease, I want to be exiting from the bead to the right of that bead. So I want to be 1 bead in. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I am going to sew down through 2 beads. I'm going to sew down through the bead right beside the bead I'm exiting. And then I'm going to sew kind of on a diagonal through the 3rd bead in on the row below it. You can see where my 1, 2, 3. And I haven't picked up anything. I'm just maneuvering and moving through the beadwork. So now I'm going to sew up through the 2nd bead in and out through the 2nd bead on the top row, because I can go through both of those beads pretty easily at the same time. And then I will pull, and I will have, when I start my row, I will be in a position to do a decrease. All right, so there's where we are. So to begin our decrease rows, we are going to pick up our 2 beads. I got 2 on. I am going to skip over to that 2nd thread bridge again. I'm not going through the first one, but the 2nd one. And then I will just continue on just in the same vein that we have been working the whole time. So I'll come up through that 2nd bead, and since I've been square stitching these beads, I'm going to go ahead and continue to square stitch bead 1 to bead 2 before I add the 3rd bead. So now I have 2 remaining thread bridges, and I have 2 remaining beads I need to add on this side. So I'll just put 1 in each. And this is basically the gist of how it's going to go for the rest of the project. Oops, sometimes you kind of sew back under that thread bridge when you're trying to sew up through the bead, and your bead will just pop off into space. So I added those 2 beads to the 2 remaining thread bridges. I'm adding my stem bead, just like we've been doing. I'm sewing under the thread bridge on the other side of the stem bead below. And you'll see on this side, we don't even have to do any doubled up stitches because I have 1, 2, 3, 4 remaining thread bridges. I'm just going to add a bead into each one of the remaining thread bridges. And I will meet you back. So now that we have our first row of 4, we are going to do one more row that has 4 beads. We are going to pick up our first 2 beads. We're going to skip a thread bridge and sew under the next, just like we did when we were doing our second row with 5 beads. So basically, this is the exact same stitching technique, because we're just going to repeat a row with the same number of beads. And I'm square stitching that first bead to the second bead one more time. So for the rest of the beads on this side, you will just use 1 bead per thread bridge and then add your stem bead. On this side of the stem bead, you will have to use 1 thread bridge twice. So keeping on with the way we were doing things before, I'm just going to choose to reuse the same thread bridge as my stem bead each time, and it just makes it a little less complicated and easy to remember because you'll be in a rhythm. All right, so 1 more stem bead for each of the remaining, or green bead, I'm sorry, for each of the remaining thread bridges, and we should have a total of 4, and I'll meet you back. So now we're ready for the decrease again, and I'll work through this with you one more time just to show you. We're exiting from the bead on the end, so we're going to sew down through the bead right beside it. And then we are going to come on to the 3rd bead on the row below that. And to sew back up, we will come up through the 2nd bead in, so that's right beside the one we're exiting, plus the 2nd bead on the top row, just like that. And we will be able to decrease the beadwork by 1 once again. Remember to pick up your 2 beads and sew under the 2nd thread bridge. So here's the first and here's the 2nd. Actually, that's the first. We want to sew under the 2nd because we're going down to 3. Just like that. So here's what our beadwork looks like so far, and we're ready to do a repeat of 3 beads on each side. So we'll pick up 2 and sew under the 2nd thread bridge for the start of this row. Then we will just simply add 1 more bead to the other thread bridge and then the stem bead. I'm going to square stitch my first bead together. It's because I like the way that that makes the work look nice and uniform. And then we will reuse the stem bead thread bridge for the first green bead on the other side, and then use the remaining 2 thread bridges for our remaining 2 beads. All right, now that we've done 2 rows with 3 beads on each side, don't forget to do a decrease into the 2nd bead here before you start. And then this row, it just consists of 2 beads on each side. So we will pick up 2, skip over to this thread bridge right next to our stem bead. And then we will add the stem bead and add 2 beads on the other side. Don't forget to double up beads on the thread bridge right next to your, that you used to add the stem bead, so that the beadwork looks the same on both sides. Add one more row of 2 beads on each side, and then I want you to go ahead and do the same steps we took to decrease by 1. And get yourself positioned coming out of the second bead from the end. I want you to pick up green bead and a stem bead, and I want you to skip the first thread bridge and sew under the thread bridge on the other side of your stem bead. Step up and straighten your first bead, just like we've been doing the whole time. Then use the same thread bridge to add one more of the green beads. And this is what we have. Work another stitch around decrease until your working thread is exiting from the last stem bead. Now I'm going to pick up a green bead and I'm going to sew down through all of my stem beads at the same time, taking my time so that I don't miss any of my beads. And you can look on both sides to make sure that you're going through the beads and you don't have exposed thread. Then we're going to pull that bead till that it sits at the top of our little leaf. And then wiggle it around to get it positioned the way you want it. And so there's our little leaf. And if you want, you can work yourself out to the next bead here or the end bead. And you can add a couple of more rows of brick stitch, as I did on this one, to give yourself a little bit more of a base down here for, you know, using it, making it easier to use in a project. You can leave it just like this if you have an idea on how you want to use that in a project already. All right, guys, that's it. This video went a little bit longer than what I was hoping for, but I'm glad that we were able to get it done. I really love this little leaf. It comes out looking really cute. On this one, I used some Picasso 8-Ohs and some matte green seed beads for this one. And it's pretty neat. I like the look of that one, too. I just wanted to really see what it would look like coming out. Using all 11 O's. All right, guys. Thanks for watching. I hope you liked this video. If you do, give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And stay tuned for more floral beading coming in the next few weeks. Have a great day, and thanks for watching.